Picture this. It's a misty dawn in rural 18th century England. Farmers are out in the open fields, working the land with simple, handheld tools, honestly exactly like their ancestors had done for centuries. It looks perfectly peaceful, right? But Europe is actually standing right on the edge of the greatest chain reaction in human history. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to trace the ultimate domino effect.
So, let's jump right into the big mystery here. How exactly did we go from pulling hand plows in the dirt to building the towering modern skyscrapers we see today, all in just a few short lifetimes? It's kind of wild to think about. But this wasn't just some random series of chaotic events. It was actually a completely seamless narrative where every single historical shift perfectly triggered the next one. So let's uncover how humanity finally flipped the switch from muscle power to machine power.
All right, Section 1, the seeds of change.
Every great story needs an inciting incident, and ours doesn't start in a smoky factory. It starts right there in the dirt, with a massive shift in how we grew our food. For generations, farming meant traditional communal open fields. Everyone shared the land. But then, landowners started doing something completely unprecedented. They started building wooden fences and hedges. This was called the enclosure system. They literally fenced off the land so they could try out private, scientific innovation. And as you can imagine, there was incredible tension in the countryside. You had these hopeful innovators pushing for progress on one side, and on the other, terrified farmers who were suddenly losing their communal lands.
But those enclosed fields quickly turned into giant outdoor laboratories for some truly incredible inventions. We're talking about the seed drill, the mechanical reaper, vastly improved plows, horse-drawn cultivators, and even the deliberate, selective breeding of livestock. These weren't just tiny tweaks, these were massive scientific leaps. And because of these new tools, those sunlit fields suddenly yielded vastly more crops. Food production just absolutely skyrocketed, creating an agricultural boom that basically set the stage for the whole modern world.
And this is what triggers the very first falling domino in our chain reaction. Step 1. All that rising food production created a massive surge in the human population. Simple math, right? More food equals more people. But here comes step 2. Those incredibly efficient new farming machines meant we needed way fewer people to actually work the land. That created a massive rural labor surplus. Which brings us to step 3. Those displaced workers had to go somewhere. Picture these crowded, muddy 18th century country roads just packed with families carrying everything they own, migrating away from the farms and heading toward the distant, smoky towns. They were desperate for work.
Moving on to Section 2, the engine awakens.
Okay, so let's follow that displaced workforce into the dim, lantern-lit spaces where they ended up, the very first factories. With the population booming, humanity suddenly needed a ridiculous amount of cloth, and we needed it fast. The acceleration here is just dizzying. In 1733, the flying shuttle speeds up weaving. Then bam, 1764, the spinning jenny hits the scene. By 1769, the water frame adds water power into the mix. 10 years later, the spinning mule refines the thread, and by 1785, the power loom is mechanizing the whole entire process. It was a rapid-fire acceleration. Just imagine the noise and the speed of these dark factories suddenly moving at a furious pace that human hands could never ever achieve.
But here's the catch. Those early textile machines, they were mostly made of wood, and wood is fragile. To build truly massive, durable machines that wouldn't just rattle themselves to pieces, we needed a completely new kind of muscle. We needed iron and steel. So the story shifts from the clatter of wooden looms to the roaring, glowing heat of blast furnaces. You've got Darby using a coke furnace to smelt iron, Huntsman developing crucible steel, and eventually the glowing Bessemer converter, which dramatically sped up mass steel production. We were quite literally forging the skeleton of the modern world.
But, a skeleton still needs a heart. And here it is. James Watt's improved steam engine. This wasn't just another machine, it was an absolute powerhouse. By using moving pistons and turning gears, Watt did something truly revolutionary. He freed factories from needing to be built right next to rivers for water power. Suddenly, you could put a factory anywhere you wanted. This engine became the beating heart of the revolution, pumping steam-powered life and relentless energy into these massive new urban centers.
Which brings us to Section 3, the world shrinks.
So, with production absolutely booming, we ran into a new problem. How do we physically move all these goods? Not to mention the massive amounts of raw materials needed to make them. Well, in the 18th century, John McAdams starts building solid, hard-surface roads, and new man-made canals are carving across the landscape. But then motion truly kicks into high gear. In 1814, George Stephenson unveils the first practical steam locomotive, and by 1825, the Stockton-Darlington Railway opens. Trains are suddenly roaring across the land on iron rails. And right alongside that physical movement, we conquered the movement of information. Inventors like Faraday, Ampere, and Morse were experimenting with sparking wires. By 1866, we actually laid a telegraph cable entirely across the Atlantic Ocean. And by the late 19th century, Alexander Graham Bell is testing the first telephone. The globe was rapidly, irreversibly shrinking.
And that leads us to Section 4, the human cost. Now, if you look beneath those smoky factory skies, you find a pretty grim split-screen reality. It wasn't just the machines that were changing. Human society was being fundamentally reorganized. On one side, you had this newly formed super-rich middle class, the wealthy factory owners, merchants, and professionals living in luxurious homes and reaping massive financial rewards. But on the exact opposite side, you had the wage-earning proletariat. These were the mill workers, including women and young children, laboring insanely long hours in dangerous conditions and living in crowded, noisy tenements. The wealth gap was staggering, and it was built right into the very architecture of the new industrial city. And actually, that local inequality quickly mapped onto the entire globe through what we call the empire loop. To feed these massive hungry factories, European powers relied on a cyclical global network. Step 1, the colonies supplied vast amounts of raw materials via these expanding global shipping networks. Step 2, European factories processed those materials using their new machinery. And Step 3, those finished industrial products were sold right back into global markets, often straight back to the colonies themselves. It was an epic, relentless feedback loop, where ships continuously fed the industrial machine and expanded trade empires worldwide.
Finally, Section 5, a changed world.
That relentless machine hasn't stopped turning. It brought us out of the thick smog of the 19th century and straight into the soaring modern skylines of today. To quote the text, the agricultural and industrial revolutions reshaped human life, transforming how we work, travel, communicate, and live. It is genuinely awe-inspiring when you stop and think about it. Every single thing we rely on today, the massive agricultural systems that feed us, the transit networks we use, the smartphone in your pocket, the steel beams in the buildings around you, it all traces its lineage perfectly back to that misty morning when some landowner decided to put a wooden fence around a field. It's just a massive, interconnected legacy of falling dominoes.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. Which domino from the Industrial Revolution is still shaping your life the most today? Is it the mechanized agriculture that puts food on your table, the global transport networks that deliver your packages, or maybe the instant communication that connects you to the entire world? Take a second to think about your own place in this ongoing historical chain reaction. Thank you so much for diving into this with me, and keep exploring the incredible narratives that built our world.